Ever heard of a year without a summer? It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, but it really happened. And the story starts on a seemingly peaceful tropical island in what we now call Indonesia. The date is April 1815, and the island is home to Mount Tambora. For centuries it had been dormant, a lush green giant watching over the people who lived in its shadow. But deep beneath the surface, something was stirring. Pressure was building, a catastrophic force waiting to be unleashed. On April 5th, the first rumbles began. Locals reported what sounded like distant cannon fire. For 5 days the mountain groaned and smoked, a prelude to the main event. Then, on the evening of April 10th, Tambora didn't just erupt, it exploded. The sound was the loudest ever recorded in human history. It was heard over 1,600 miles away. To put that in perspective, imagine an explosion in New York City being clearly heard in Dallas, Texas. British officials stationed hundreds of miles away sent out warships thinking they were under attack. That's how powerful the initial blast was. But the sound was just the beginning. The eruption column, a terrifying tower of hot gas, rock, and ash, rocketed an astonishing 27 miles high, right into the stratosphere. This is far above where weather happens, a layer of the atmosphere where particles can linger and spread for years. The sheer volume of material ejected from Tambora was staggering. We're talking about 150 cubic kilometers of debris. To help you visualize this, think of the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens in the United States. That was a huge, newsworthy event. Tambora was 100 times more powerful. It released energy equivalent to millions of atomic bombs. In fact, on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, a scale used to measure eruptions, Tambora scored a 7 out of a possible 8. There has not been a single eruption of this magnitude anywhere on Earth since. The immediate aftermath was apocalyptic for the surrounding region. The sky turned black as day became night. Superheated pyroclastic flows, avalanches of gas and rock moving at hundreds of miles per hour, incinerated everything in their path, wiping out villages and the entire kingdom of Tambora. Tsunamis triggered by the eruption smashed into neighboring islands. The death toll from the initial blast and its immediate effects was in the tens of thousands. But the local devastation, as horrific as it was only the first chapter of this global disaster. The real story, the part that would affect the entire planet, was happening high above the clouds. The massive plume of ash and, more importantly, sulfur dioxide began to spread. Carried by stratospheric winds, this fine aerosol veil started to encircle the globe. It was like a giant sunshade being pulled over the Earth. This sulfur-rich layer was incredibly effective at reflecting sunlight back into space. Less sunlight meant less heat reaching the Earth's surface. And so, the stage was set for a worldwide climate catastrophe. The planet began to cool. The year after the eruption, 1816, would go down in history as the year without a summer. People had no idea what was happening. They didn't know that a volcano on the other side of the world was responsible for their strange, cold, and wet weather. All they knew was that something was terribly wrong. In North America, the effects were dramatic and bizarre. In May 1816, a late frost killed off newly planted crops across New England. June brought what was described as a dry fog that reddened the sun and couldn't be dispersed by wind or rain. And then came the snow. In June. Imagine that. Snow falling in Vermont and New Hampshire with ice on lakes and rivers in July and August. The growing season was a disaster. Farmers replanted their crops 2, 3, even 4 times, only to see them fail again and again due to the relentless cold. Corn, a staple crop, was completely wiped out in many areas. The price of grain skyrocketed. People who couldn't afford to buy food were forced to eat whatever they could find: raccoons, pigeons, even boiled nettles. Many farming families packed up everything they owned and headed west, contributing to the westward expansion of the United States, all because of a volcano they'd never even heard of. The situation in Europe was just as dire, if not worse. The continent was already struggling to recover from the Napoleonic Wars. The climate chaos was the last thing they needed. 1816 was marked by constant, chilling rain and severe storms. Major rivers like the Rhine flooded their banks, destroying what little crops had managed to grow. In Ireland, the failed potato harvest led to a typhus epidemic that claimed tens of thousands of lives. In Switzerland, the famine was so severe that people resorted to eating moss and cats. The desperation led to food riots and social unrest across the continent. People were starving and governments were unstable. The year without a summer wasn't just a weather event, it was a humanitarian crisis on a massive scale. And the impact wasn't limited to just North America and Europe. The Tambora event disrupted weather patterns worldwide. In Asia, the cooling effect altered the Indian monsoon cycle. The delayed and weakened monsoons led to both drought and widespread flooding in different parts of the subcontinent. In southern China, the rice harvest failed for 3 consecutive years due to the cold and floods. This led to a devastating famine in Yunnan province, a tragedy that is often overlooked in Western accounts of the event. The global food supply chain, even in the 19th century, was thrown into complete disarray. But this global catastrophe also had some strange and unexpected cultural side effects. Think about that gloomy, rainy summer in Europe. A group of young literary friends were vacationing by Lake Geneva in Switzerland. They were trapped indoors by the incessant rain. Their names? Lord Byron, Percy Bysshe Shelley, his future wife Mary Godwin, and a physician named John Polidori. To pass the time, Lord Byron proposed a challenge that they each write a ghost story. Percy Shelley struggled, and Byron wrote a fragment. But Mary Godwin, who would soon become Mary Shelley, was inspired by the grim atmosphere and a nightmare she had. She began writing a story about a scientist who creates a monstrous life form. That story would become one of the most famous novels of all time, Frankenstein. In the same house, during that same gloomy summer, John Polidori wrote a story called The Vampire, which became the first modern vampire story in English, and a major inspiration for Bram Stoker's Dracula. So, 2 of the most iconic monsters in literature were born from the gloom of Tambora's year without a summer. The artistic impact didn't stop there. The volcanic aerosols in the stratosphere created incredibly vivid, spectacular sunsets for years after the eruption. The skies were filled with brilliant yellows, oranges, and reds. Artists of the time, particularly the British painter J.M.W. Turner, captured these stunning, almost apocalyptic skies in his work. His paintings from this period are famous for their dramatic, fiery sunsets. For a long time, art historians thought he was just being imaginative, but scientists now believe he was accurately painting the atmospheric effects of the Tambora eruption. He was painting history without even knowing it. It took years for the global climate to return to normal as the volcanic aerosols slowly fell out of the stratosphere. But the impact of Tambora was long-lasting. It caused famine, disease, mass migration, and social upheaval. But it also, strangely, gave us Frankenstein, the modern vampire, and some of the most beautiful sunset paintings ever created. It's a powerful reminder of how interconnected our world is, and how a single event on one side of the planet can change the lives of everyone on it. The story of Tambora is a story of destruction, survival, and the unexpected consequences that ripple through history. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. See you next time.